Melissa Rivera has the receipt that proves someone serviced her hotel room 4 times on the night of October 18th, 2019. She has the timestamps, the service descriptions, the staff signatures. Here's the problem. She wasn't there. Turn down service, 10:15 p.m. Towel replacement, 10:47 p.m. Bedding refresh, 11:23 p.m. Bathroom restock, 12:04 a.m. Melissa was at a company dinner until 11:30. She has the restaurant receipt. She has texts from that evening showing her location. She didn't return to room 428 of the Heatherwick Grand until nearly midnight. But according to the hotel's handwritten logs, maintained in leather-bound journals and verified by supervisors, 4 different staff members entered her room, performed services, and signed their names while she was provably miles away. When she returned at 11:50 p.m., her room looked untouched. Bed still made from morning housekeeping, towels in the same position. Nothing moved, nothing changed. So who entered? What did they actually do in there? And why does the documentation say services were performed that clearly never happened? The Heatherwick Grand is a meticulously restored Victorian hotel in Washington state. Every service is logged by hand. Staff sign their names. Supervisors verify. The system has been maintained since 2003 with obsessive accuracy. The logs are never wrong, they said. Except Melissa has proof she was somewhere else. And when an investigator started digging, he found 11 other guests with the same impossible entries. All solo travelers. All 4th floor. All with logged services performed while they were provably out. What is actually being documented in those journals? Subscribe. You need to see what the evidence reveals. The Heatherwick Grand opened its doors in 1887 as the Pacific Northwest's answer to European elegance. Railroad money built its 5 stories of red brick and wrought iron. Timber barons filled its rooms. Its ballroom hosted governors, artists, and at least one future president. For 43 years, it was the jewel of Washington state hospitality. Then it burned. Not completely. The 1930 fire started in the kitchen and consumed the eastern wing before firefighters contained it. 3 staff members died. The hotel closed. For decades, it sat empty, windows broken, roof collapsing, becoming the kind of place teenagers dared each other to enter at midnight. By the 1990s, the city planned demolition. Historical societies protested. A compromise was reached. Private funding for restoration in exchange for historical landmark status. Enter the Carlyle Foundation, tech money this time. They spent 8 years and $14 million returning the Heatherwick Grand to its 1887 glory, original floor plans, period-appropriate furnishings, gas lamps converted to electric with historically accurate fixtures. They even tracked down the original guest registry and staff employment records, displaying them in glass cases in the lobby. When the hotel reopened in 2003, travel magazines called it a living museum of Victorian hospitality. The foundation's director, a preservation architect named Catherine Vance, insisted on one unusual policy. All housekeeping would be logged by hand in leather-bound journals, just as it had been in the original hotel. Staff would sign and timestamp every service. Supervisors would verify. The journals would become part of the historical record, she explained. Future generations could see exactly how the hotel operated, day by day, room by room. No one questioned it. It seemed charmingly antiquated, authentically Victorian. Melissa Rivera didn't know any of this when she booked room 428 for a 3-night stay in October 2019. She was a regional sales manager for a medical supply company, in town for a conference at the convention center 6 blocks away. She'd chosen the Heatherwick Grand because her company's usual chain hotel was fully booked, and the online photos looked nice. Victorian wasn't really her style. She preferred modern minimalism, but the reviews were strong and the location was convenient. She checked in on a Wednesday afternoon. The lobby was exactly as advertised, restored to obsessive detail. Mahogany front desk, Tiffany lamps, walls papered in burgundy damask. Even the elevator was original, a brass-gated cage that groaned and clicked as it rose. The clerk, an older man with silver hair and a waistcoat. handed her an actual metal key, not a key card, an iron key with an ornate bow, and the number 428 engraved in scrollwork. "4th floor," he said. "Breakfast is served from 6 to 10 in the dining room. Housekeeping makes rounds between 9 a.m. and noon. If you need anything, dial 0 for the front desk." Melissa thanked him and took the elevator up. The 4th floor hallway was narrow, lit by wall sconces that cast more shadow than light. Dark wood wainscoting, thick carpet that muffled footsteps. Her room was at the end of the hall, past what looked like a dozen identical doors. She unlocked it and stepped inside. The room was smaller than she'd expected, but impeccably maintained. 4-poster bed with a quilted coverlet, marble-topped dresser, window overlooking the street, everything spotless, arranged with precise care. She dropped her luggage, checked the bathroom, clawfoot tub, pedestal sink, brass fixtures, and headed out for dinner. Thursday and Friday passed in a blur of conference sessions and client meetings. She barely spent time in the room except to sleep. Friday evening, her company scheduled a dinner at a restaurant called The Copper Table, about 15 minutes from the hotel. Melissa left room 428 at 6:45 p.m., making sure to hang the "Do Not Disturb" sign on her door. She didn't want housekeeping entering while she was out. The dinner ran long. Good conversation, wine, dessert. She didn't check her phone much. When she finally called for a car back to the hotel, it was 11:20 p.m. She returned to the Heatherwick Grand at 11:47 p.m. and went straight to bed. Melissa woke Saturday morning to her phone alarm at 7:15 a.m. She showered, dressed, and packed her belongings. Checkout wasn't until 11, but she wanted to grab breakfast and hit the road early. She did a final sweep of the bathroom, zipped her suitcase, and headed downstairs. The front desk clerk was different from the silver-haired man who'd checked her in. This was a woman in her mid-30s, dark hair pulled back, name tag reading Sophie. She smiled as Melissa approached. "Checking out of 428? "Yes, please." Sophie typed on the computer and frowned slightly. "I'm so sorry, Ms. Rivera. There's been an error with our housekeeping logs. You were charged for several services last night that shouldn't have been billed. Of course, we'll remove those charges. I apologize for the confusion." Melissa's stomach tightened. "What kind of services?" "Let me see." Sophie reached beneath the desk for a leather journal. She opened it, flipped to a bookmarked page, and ran her finger down a column of handwritten entries. "This is odd. You have 4 housekeeping entries logged Friday night. Turn down service, towel replacement, bedding refresh, and amenity restock." "What time?" Sophie squinted at the entries. "Between 10:15 p.m. and just after midnight." Melissa felt something cold settle in her chest. "I wasn't there." Sophie looked up. "I'm sorry?" "I was at dinner. I didn't get back until almost midnight." Melissa pulled out her phone, scrolling to her text messages. "Look, I was texting a colleague at 10:40, and here's my restaurant receipt. We paid at 11:32. She turned the phone around. Sophie stared at the screen, then back at the journal. That's very strange. Our staff would never enter a room with the "Do Not Disturb" sign posted, and even without the sign, we always knock and wait for permission. "I had the sign up," Melissa said. "I put it on the door before I left." Sophie's professional demeanor wavered. Then these entries shouldn't exist. She turned the journal so Melissa could see. But they're definitely logged. 4 different signatures. Turned down at 10:15 by Robert Hayes, towels at 10:47 by Jennifer Ortiz, bedding at 11:23 by David Pham, and bathroom restock at 12:04 by... She leaned closer. "I can't read this last signature." Melissa stared at the handwriting. 4 separate entries. 4 different names, all claiming to have serviced her room while she was provably somewhere else. "Could they have entered the wrong room number?" she asked. Sophie shook her head slowly. "The logs are checked by supervisors at the end of each shift. Room number errors would be caught immediately." She paused. "When you returned to your room last night, did anything seem different? Moved? Changed?" Melissa thought back. She'd been tired, a little buzzed from wine. She'd kicked off her shoes, brushed her teeth, and collapsed into bed. No. Everything looked the same as when I left. The bed was still made from morning housekeeping. Towels were in the same position. So no services were actually performed. Not that I could tell. Sophie closed the journal and stepped into a back office. Melissa stood at the desk, heart beating faster than it should. 4 entries. 4 people claiming they'd entered her room, all while she was miles away at dinner. Sophie returned with a thin woman in her 50s wearing a supervisor's badge. Ms. Rivera, I'm Anne Castellanos, housekeeping manager. I've reviewed last night's assignments, and I can assure you, no one should have entered your room, especially with a "Do Not Disturb" sign posted. Then why is it logged 4 times? Anne's expression tightened. I don't know, but I will investigate this thoroughly. Our staff takes documentation very seriously. No one falsifies entries. Then someone entered my room, Melissa said, 4 times, while I wasn't there. The lobby had gone very quiet. Melissa accepted the complimentary receipt and left the hotel in a state of confused anger. She told herself it had to be bureaucratic error, staff logging the wrong rooms, sloppy record-keeping covered up with apologies, something mundane and explainable. But the unease followed her home to Portland. It sat with her through weekend errands, through Monday morning meetings, through Tuesday evening when she finally opened her laptop and Googled Heatherwick Grand Hotel. The search returned official websites, TripAdvisor reviews, historical articles about the restoration. She added housekeeping error to the search, then logged services, then strange incidents. That's when she found the blog. It was titled Pacific Northwest Oddities and appeared to be run by a community college history teacher named Brian Wolfe, who collected unusual regional stories. Most entries were benign, cryptid sightings, local legends, unexplained phenomena. But one post from 2017 caught her attention. The Heatherwick Grand's Phantom Services. She clicked. The post described an incident nearly identical to Melissa's. A business traveler named Janet Kowalski had stayed at the Heatherwick Grand in June 2017. At checkout, her bill included multiple housekeeping charges for services logged while she was attending an evening work event. She had calendar entries proving she'd been in meetings. She had badge swipes from the convention center. She was nowhere near the hotel between 9 p.m. and 11 p.m. Yet, the logs showed 3 separate services performed in her room during that exact window. Kowalski had pressed the issue. She'd contacted other guests from the same week. 2 reported the same thing. Services logged during hours they were provably out of the hotel. The hotel had apologized, comped the charges, and insisted the logs must have contained timestamp errors, though they'd never had timestamp errors before. Kowalski filed a complaint with the State Tourism Board. Nothing came of it. The blog post ended with a question. What is the Heatherwick Grand documenting if not actual housekeeping? Melissa read it twice, then scrolled to the comments section. There were 19 responses. Most were skeptical, people suggesting clerical errors, confused staff, or guests misremembering their schedules. But 3 comments stood out. User PNW History Buff had written, the original Heatherwick Grand was obsessive about documentation. The owner, Malcolm Heatherwick, required staff to log every movement, every service, every interaction with guests. After the 1930 fire, investigators found journals dating back to opening day. Some entries were disturbingly detailed, not just what services were performed, but observations about guests, what they wore, how they behaved, whether they seemed nervous or relaxed. Heatherwick believed perfect service required perfect knowledge. Another user, Seattle Archivist, replied, I've seen some of those original journals. They're in the county archives. One thing that struck me, there are entries for services performed in unoccupied rooms, not rooms where guests had checked out, rooms where guests were temporarily absent. Staff would enter, perform minor tasks, and document the condition of personal belongings. One entry from 1892 literally says, guest's diary left open on desk, appears to contain travel plans. Why would housekeeping note that? A third commenter, Vancouver Jen, added, "My grandmother worked at the Heatherwick before the fire. She was a chambermaid. She said Mr. Heatherwick had master keys to every room and would personally inspect them when guests were out. He called it quality assurance. Grandma said some of the staff thought he was looking for reasons to refuse service to certain guests, checking if they were appropriate for his establishment. She quit in 1928 because it made her uncomfortable." Melissa sat back from her laptop. Quality assurance, perfect knowledge, inspecting rooms when guests were absent. She opened a new tab and searched for Heatherwick Grand contact information. She found the main number and called. A man answered. "Heatherwick Grand, how may I assist you?" "I'd like to speak with your general manager about a billing issue from last weekend." "One moment, please." The line clicked. Elevator music played. Then a smooth, practiced voice. "This is Thomas Garrett. How can I help you?" "Mr. Garrett, this is Melissa Rivera. I checked out last Saturday. I was told you'd be calling me about discrepancies in my housekeeping logs." "Ah, yes, Ms. Rivera. I apologize for not reaching out sooner. I've reviewed the logs from your stay. I've also spoken with the staff members whose signatures appear in Friday night's entries." "And?" "They all confirmed they followed standard protocol. They knocked, received no answer, saw the do not disturb sign, and logged attempted service. Sometimes when we attempt a service but can't complete it due to guest absence or request, staff still log the attempt for accountability purposes." Melissa felt her jaw tighten. "That's not what the logs say. They don't say attempted. They list completed services, turn down service, towel replacement, bedding refresh. Those aren't attempts. Those are finished tasks." A pause. "You're correct. That does appear to be how they were logged. It's possible the staff members made notation errors." 4 different people made the same error on the same night? "I understand your skepticism, Ms. Rivera, but I can assure you our staff would never enter an occupied room or a room with a posted privacy request without explicit permission. If the logs indicate otherwise, it's a documentation issue, not an actual breach of protocol." "Then let me speak with these staff members directly. I want to hear their accounts." "I'm afraid I can't facilitate that. Employee privacy regulations. But I've conducted internal interviews, and I'm confident this was a logging mistake. As a gesture of goodwill, I'd like to offer you a complimentary weekend stay." "I'm not coming back," Melissa said flatly. "I understand. Well, if you change your mind, the offer stands. Again, I apologize for any concern this caused." The call ended. Melissa sat staring at her phone. Documentation issue. Logging mistake. The same deflections Janet Kowalski had received 2 years earlier. She returned to Brian Wolf's blog and found a contact form at the bottom. She wrote a careful message describing her experience, the dinner, the timestamps, the impossible logged entries. She asked if he had additional information. She hit send. The reply came 6 hours later. Brian's email was detailed and troubling. Since posting about Kowalski's experience, he'd been contacted by 11 other people. All had stayed at the Heatherwick Grand. All had experienced services logged during the provable absences, dinners, evening events, late arrivals. Every guest could document being elsewhere, yet the hotel's journals showed completed services. "The hotel's response is always identical," Brian wrote. "They apologize, remove charges, and claim it's either logging errors or attempted services that were mistakenly recorded as completed. But here's what bothers me. Their logs are flawless for everything else. I obtained copies of health inspection reports going back to 2003. Every inspector notes how meticulous their record keeping is. Room counts match inventory. Schedules match staffing. Everything aligns perfectly. Except these entries," he continued. "I started tracking patterns. The incidents only happen on the 4th floor. Always rooms in the 420s. Always between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m. And they only happen to solo travelers. Never couples, never families. Just people staying alone." Melissa read that line 3 times. Room 428, solo traveler. Between 10 p.m. and midnight. Brian's email concluded, I think something is being documented, but it's not housekeeping services. The hotel knows exactly what it is, and they're using the logging error excuse to avoid explaining. If you're willing, I'd like to publish your account. I can use a pseudonym if you prefer. Melissa replied immediately, authorizing publication and asking, have you tried to contact the staff members who signed these entries? His response came the next morning. 2 years ago, I visited and asked to speak with Robert Hayes, one of the names from Kowalski's logs. Front desk said he no longer worked there. I asked about 3 other names from various incidents. Same answer. All had resigned or been terminated within weeks of the entries they signed. Melissa's hands went cold. She called the Heatherwick Grand again. I need to know if Robert Hayes, Jennifer Ortiz, and David Pham still work there. Sophie's voice was careful. I'm not at liberty to discuss employee status. If you have concerns... Melissa hung up. Melissa spent the next 2 weeks consumed. She read everything Brian sent, historical articles about Malcolm Heatherwick, archived complaints from 1890s guests, business records from the hotel's original era. She learned that Heatherwick had been obsessed with creating anticipatory service, staff knowing guest needs before they were expressed. But the reality was darker than marketing suggested. Heatherwick had installed servants' corridors behind the walls so staff could move unseen. He'd required detailed logs, not just of services, but of guest behavior, belongings, and habits. Multiple complaints from the 1890s described guests finding personal items moved or examined. One woman reported her locked diary had been opened and left on a different page. When confronted, Heatherwick's staff always claimed they were ensuring nothing was stolen or checking room condition for quality purposes. The woman wrote to a Seattle newspaper, "The Heatherwick Grand does not serve guests. It investigates them." Brian called Melissa 2 weeks after their first email exchange. "I think I know how to prove what's happening. I'm going to book a room, 4th floor. I'll leave for the evening. Make sure I'm gone between 10 p.m. and midnight. I'll set up a camera inside pointing at the door. If someone enters, we'll have footage. If nobody enters, we prove the logs are fabricated." "I'll do it too," Melissa said. 2 rooms, 2 cameras, better data. They booked for a Friday 3 weeks out. Brian reserved room 424. Melissa took 426. They agreed to meet in the lobby, check in separately, set up cameras, then leave the hotel for the evening. Friday arrived. Melissa drove north with a motion-activated camera in her bag. She felt ridiculous and anxious in equal measure, but she needed to know. The lobby looked exactly as she remembered. Sophie wasn't at the desk. A different clerk checked her in without recognition. Melissa took the iron key and rode the elevator to the 4th floor. Room 426 was nearly identical to 428. She positioned the camera on the dresser, angled toward the door. She tested it. Motion detected. Recording began. Perfect. She hung the Do Not Disturb sign outside and texted Brian. "Camera set. You?" His reply. "Same. Leaving at 8. You?" 8:30. "Meet back at midnight?" "Yes." Melissa left the hotel at 8:35 p.m. She drove to a coffee shop, ordered dinner, and tried to read. Mostly, she watched the clock. At 11:45 p.m., she drove back to the Heatherwick Grand, parked, and waited in the lobby. Brian appeared at 11:58. "Anything happen while you were gone?" she asked quietly. "No alerts from the camera. You?" "Same." They took the elevator up together. The 4th floor hallway was silent and dim. They parted at their respective doors. Melissa unlocked 426, grabbed the camera, and pulled up the footage on her phone. Nothing. No motion detected. No one had entered. She checked the timestamp on the camera. It had been recording continuously from 8:36 p.m. to 11:49 p.m., over 3 hours, 0 alerts. She texted Brian. "No one entered. You?" His reply came immediately. "Same. No motion detected, but what? Check your belongings." Melissa looked around the room. Her suitcase was where she'd left it. Her toiletries in the bathroom arranged the same way. Nothing moved, nothing disturbed. Then she noticed her laptop. She'd left it closed on the desk. Now it was open, just slightly, maybe an inch. The screen was dark, but the angle had changed. Her heart rate spiked. She texted Brian, "My laptop was closed. Now it's open. My notebook was in my bag. Now it's on the nightstand." They met in the hallway. Brian's face was pale. "No one entered. The cameras prove it, but someone was in there." "How?" Before he could answer, both their phones buzzed simultaneously. A text from an unknown number. "Checkout is at 11 a.m. Please ensure all personal belongings are secured." They stared at each other. "They're watching," Melissa whispered. At 7 a.m., they went downstairs and checked out. Brian requested his itemized receipt first. His hands shook as he read it. 3 logged entries. Times when his camera showed an empty hallway. Melissa's receipt showed 4. Melissa and Brian filed formal complaints with the State Tourism Board. They submitted camera footage showing no entries. They provided testimony. They documented the moved belongings. The board investigated for 3 months, then sent identical letters. After thorough review, we find no evidence of wrongdoing. Housekeeping logs reflect staff documentation practices consistent with historical preservation standards. No mention of the camera evidence. No explanation for the moved items. Nothing. Brian published their account on his blog. It went viral in niche paranormal communities. The hotel declined all interview requests. Catherine Vance, the restoration architect who'd insisted on manual logging, retired 6 months later. The Heatherwick Grand continued operating. Reviews remained glowing. Until 2021, when Melissa received an email from Diane Ostroff, a retired county archivist. She'd seen Brian's blog post and remembered something from her years processing documents recovered from the 1930 fire. "I found a partial journal from 1929, she wrote. Most pages were destroyed, but one section survived. It disturbed me enough that I made a photocopy before the original was sealed. I think you should see it." The attached image showed a badly burned ledger page. One entry was legible. "Room 47, 11:40 p.m. Inspection. Staff, M. Heatherwick. Condition, guest absent. Personal diary examined. Contains concerning political views. Guest flagged for discretionary service reduction." Below it, in different handwriting, "Guest departed without notice. Following morning. No forwarding address provided." Melissa showed Brian. He went quiet, then said, "It was never about housekeeping. It was about control. Heatherwick wanted to know everything about his guests, what they thought, what they believed, whether they were appropriate for his establishment. Staff would enter rooms when guests were out and document everything. Personal papers, belongings, anything that revealed who they really were. And Catherine Vance recreated that system," Melissa said slowly. "She thought she was preserving historical accuracy. She didn't realize she was reviving surveillance. Or maybe she did realize and thought it was acceptable. Hotels have always watched guests. Security cameras are everywhere now. This is just older, more intimate. But who's doing it? The staff whose names are in the logs deny everything." Brian had no answer. When journalists contacted current Heatherwick Grand employees following the blog post, all denied entering guest rooms without permission. Some claimed they'd never worked night shifts. Others said they only signed logs for services performed during occupied hours. Yet, entries continued appearing. Solo travelers on the 4th floor. Services logged during documented absences. Items subtly moved. In 2023, the hotel quietly discontinued manual logging. Housekeeping is now tracked digitally, though what that system actually records, no one outside management knows. The leather journals were donated to the county archives and sealed. Catherine Vance died in 2024. Her obituary praised her dedication to authentic historical preservation, but mentioned nothing about the Heatherwick Grand's logging practices. Melissa never returned. Brian visited once more in 2022, staying across the street and simply observing. He watched guests enter and exit, watched staff arrive for shifts, watched the building stand elegant and inscrutable against Washington rain. "It's still happening," he told Melissa that night. "They just stopped documenting it where we can see." "How do you know?" "Because guests still rave about the service. They say staff anticipate their every need. They say they sleep better there than anywhere else. They say it feels like the hotel knows them." He paused. "How do you think staff anticipate needs before guests express them?" The Heatherwick Grand operates today at full capacity. Its website advertises service that feels almost psychic and Victorian elegance with modern understanding. Reservations book months ahead. And somewhere in sealed archive boxes, leather journals document a century of entries made while guests were provably elsewhere. Melissa is 32 now. She still travels for work. She chooses modern chain hotels with visible cameras and electronic locks. She never leaves belongings unsecured. And sometimes, alone in anonymous rooms, she wonders, how many hotels have you stayed in where staff seemed unusually attentive? Where service felt eerily personalized? Where you returned to find nothing obviously wrong, but something indefinably different? How many times has someone documented your absence? And what did they find worth recording?